And welcome back to another episode of the Dynasty Dingers podcast. We have a very fun episode for you today. We're going to be breaking down some of the 2024 Major League breakouts. And we also just got finished doing a mock draft for Dynasty. This is going to cover the 2024 season and the 2025 season. So we had a little bit of opportunity to look back and take players that have already performed well, and then look forward and take some players that we're excited for. But before we get started, I want to welcome in Owen. Owen is back with the show today. Doc is out camping, enjoying a little bit of family. He'll be back next week. Owen, welcome in, buddy.
Thank you. Good to be back. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're. I think you're the de facto two now, and that's a good thing. Like we were kind of talking about just how we feel about being on camera and whatnot, and I think fantasy baseball podcast is the perfect time for the opportunity to shake off some of those jitters, because I've been doing this almost 4 years now, and I'll tell you, when I started, I absolutely despised being on camera. It was not something I liked at all, and my background was also kind of embarrassing. My wife and I were living in a smaller apartment at the time, and didn't really like take care of the room I was in at the time. So like any given episode you'd see me with, like there might be a rally monkey in the corner, or there might be like a pile of laundry that hasn't been folded. So yeah, I've come a long way, and I hope this is still fun for you, and you can look back fondly on these episodes.
Oh, I certainly will. For me, it's always the noise in the background. It's like, is my audio going to come out well? Are the
Yeah.
dogs out? Are the dogs outside? Who's on the floor? Those little things you just look back on fondly, and it's like, did I really care this much about this?
Well, what was it? Oh, it was a trade deadline podcast that were being recorded by a few of the really popular publications. And I like to take in as much content as I can, and one of them must have had one of their spouses in the background, like cleaning the house, because every 3 or 4 seconds you'd hear like a bang of the silverware drawer, or you'd hear like the vacuum start. And this is a massive publication, and my thought was, okay, if they can have this as professional work, all of us need to chill out and just kind
Yeah,
of take this less seriously,
I'll,
because
I'll be honest, that would drive me insane.
oh, it was
Yeah,
obnoxious. It was hard to listen to the show. It really was. All right, Owen, let's kind of jump into it. So 2024 breakouts is kind of what I have listed here, hot performers, what our gauge is for what they're currently doing, and also then headed into 2025. So first name I want to start off with is Lawrence Butler for the A's. Another home run just this week in a pinch hit role. Seems to be coming on really strong. The exit velocities are above 92 miles per hour average. I want to say he's at 93 now. So we have some data showing that he might be real, but the strikeouts are high. What are your thoughts on Butler?
Yeah, so I think overall my first impression obviously is that how much better the second taste of the majors is going for him as the first. 248, 313, 479, 13 home runs, 35 RBIs. What interests me as well is that the 9 stolen bases. That's roughly, I think he's about 60 games in, I think, if I'm not mistaken. That's full season pace. We could be looking at a future 2020 guy. And you mentioned the EVs as well. Uh, you know, and I think another guy like we'll mention later, Mark Vientos, approach leaves a bit to be desired. 27 and a half strikeout clip, whiff rate just under 30%. But I think to his credit, though, he's almost tripled his walk rate. It was I think 3.1 when in 2023 in the majors. It's now up to 8.8 now. So I feel like that's at the very least positive trajectory. Maybe we'll see that strikeout rate come down naturally as well. But I feel like you've got to really just like the power. It's a really carrying tool for him. Even if the strikeouts stay high, that's what's going to carry his profile. And you see the speed coming along as well. This is a guy I like. I'm very in on Lawrence Butler, and I'm excited to see how he performs down the future.
Yeah, and he seems to have, at least for me, that superstar, or at least like that pedigree of swagger with him, where you want to watch him. I'm an owner in a few leagues with Lawrence Butler, so obviously I'm biased, but he just seems to have marketability. And I think that's really important too, because I will continue to come back to this. Like, a lot of us play fantasy baseball because we want to root for the guys we like. And I like Lawrence Butler. So to see him come on and perform well, I think is really exciting. You kind of talked a little bit about Mark Vientos. He's our next name. And I think the big profile I have for Butler is we need to see, as you kind of said it, an approach change where you can lower that K rate a little bit. But we've seen that from Vientos. So I do believe that players, as they develop and as they mature, can find approach changes. What are your thoughts on Vientos in 2024? And do you think this is a real breakout going into 2025?
Absolutely. Very, very, very in on the Mark Vientos breakout. As you mentioned, still a little bit left to be desired about the strikeouts, but he's secured the everyday third base job, batting 280, 16 home runs, 42 RBIs. And among third basemen with a minimum of 200 plate appearances, he's second, trailing only Rafael Devers in slugging, OPS, and WRC plus. His 280 average ranks sixth. These are numbers when I look at this, and you tell me this is a full-fledged breakout candidate going into next season, I can really get behind it.
Yeah, and it's interesting I think when we look back at the start of the season, we would have thought the biggest breakout entering probably the top 10 third baseman would have been Junior Caminero. Here we are talking about Mark Vientos, and that's just fantasy baseball for you, right? It's unpredictable at
Absolutely.
times, even though we sit here and we break things down. Mark
Yeah.
Vientos was forgotten about, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you look at those numbers that I mentioned. He's near the top percentile of the league in barrel rate. This is a guy you look at. Maybe the average we can see a little bit of regression in that, but this is a guy that can hit 30 home runs. He's still just 24 years old too. So there's really a lot to like about the profile.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. That 26% K rate, that's clearly climbed over the last couple of months. He was doing a pretty good job of keeping that below 25. But that is going to be his hiccup, right? It always has been. It is the ability for him to make contact and be overly aggressive. But he's done a good job this year of at least putting to their counting stats that showcase a starting player and potentially an all-star, I think, down the road.
Absolutely,
Transfer,
can definitely see that.
yeah, and again, I think from the price point where he's performing at, I think he went probably undrafted in a lot of startups.
This guy's been like a waiver savior for
Hmm.
really that kind of first base, third base, even just a power bat.
Yeah. Alec Burleson is another one of those guys. We're not going to talk about Burleson today. He's a guy Doc and I have really kind of beat the dead horse on, but another guy that's kind of come on late in his I guess late in his early 20s. We're so used to guys at 21, 22 coming up and having expectations, but I think we have to have real expectations too that the guys 24, 25 can still have these breakouts. And that kind of takes us to our next name. Now, this was more or less, I think, because of injury, but Garrett Crochet breaking out for the White Sox this year. Obviously, a lot of drama with the fact that their usage has been hindering his fantasy value as of late. But this was a massive performance to start the year. At one point, led the league in strikeouts. Do you think he can carry this into 2025? And is he entering top 20 or maybe top 15 dynasty starting pitchers for you?
Top 15 for me, yes. And I think regardless of whether he gets shut down, he's already over double his previous career high in innings. Crochet's ascent, first year as a starting pitcher to, ace level status has been a really good bright spot for this team. He's savant page is right where you'd like to see, among the league's best in expected ERA, expected batting average, whiff, K percentage. I'm all in on Crochet and Dynasty. I feel like he is rightfully in that conversation of the best pitchers in the league. Sure, there's definitely the drama about the innings going over this year, but next year he is a guy that I'm very confident in.
So I think his profile for me screams Tarek Skubal from last year. Now, Skubal had more prospect pedigree because he was a starter and he actually pitched significant time in the minor leagues. Crochet coming out of Tennessee didn't have that same ability, right? They called him up, was a reliever almost right away, blew out the elbow. Here he is. Do you think he has the opportunity to be SP 1 to 5 like Skubal performed this year, or are you tempering those expectations a little?
I certainly think it's lofty expectations, but I think just given what we've seen so far and just what he's done to this point, it's doable. I would say temper the expectations with the innings, even next season. I don't think this is a guy we're going to see like a true workhorse starting pitcher 1 innings workload from. That being in like the 180, 190 range. I don't think he's gonna get there. But this is a guy. The numbers are there. You say starting pitcher 1 to starting pitcher 5. I could see starting pitcher 1.
Yeah.
That's just how good he's been and just how bright his future could be. Health permitting.
Well, I think it also screams volumes for the lack of dominant strikeout pitchers that we have right now.
Absolutely,
Right.
especially he's really a closer in a starter's build,
Yeah.
and that the strikeout rates are you look at that, you're like, this is what you'd expect from your ninth inning guy, but no, this is a guy that he's got 162 strikeouts, I believe it is, and I think 114 innings pitched is what he's at now. It's just near the top of the league, and just of course, yeah, he's gonna. I feel like a shutdown is coming for him soon, but it's been an amazing season for him so far. Just absolutely blown away expectations. I remember when he was named the Sox Open Day starter, people were like, what? Who's this guy? He's never started before. So if you're Garrett Crochet, you've got to be happy with how this season's ended.
Yeah, I'm really frustrated with myself. I loved him at Tennessee, and when he was named opening day starter, I still had a few drafts, and I just didn't take him, even though I loved it. I thought, okay, this is awesome. Like, if there's a chance for a breakout, a big breakout, he's got to be at the top of my list. Now, with him going 4 innings, kind of capped at about 75 pitches per game, I think it's realistic we might see him through the fifth. But as the White Sox lost their 21st game yesterday, I don't think it matters for wins with Crochet. Doesn't seem like the White
Not at
Sox
all.
will win anyway. So I guess my question is, if this is non-dynasty, are you dropping him right now for the hottest flavor on the waiver wire?
No, not yet. I,
Okay.
I I think if he does get shut down, which is very possible, given the direction the White Sox are trending in. Um, yes, when that happens, yes, I would be fine dropping him. But I think for now, even at 4 innings, maybe 5 innings, he's still putting up good numbers for you. This is a guy that still in my start tier. Even he may not get those double-digit strikeouts with the workload that he's given, but no, he's not quite in that kind of level of. He's not in that drop tier for me yet.
Okay. Awesome. Next name is a guy that we're putting in the 2024 breakout classification, but we could really put it in the July and August classification here. It's Tyler Fitzgerald for the San Francisco Giants. He's been on an absolute tear as of late. 12 home runs in the last 30 days alone, really putting up dominant superstar numbers. Hitting three. Let's see here. He's hitting 313 with a 369 on base percentage. Oh, and he has been all over the Twitter world, the fantasy world. But my question for you is, with an exit velocity 88.3 average and then a max of 107.3, do you think he's really just pulling in or leaning into his pull side power? Do you think it's sustainable? Like, what are your overall thoughts of Fitzgerald?
So his current pace, no, I don't believe it's sustainable at all. He's hit 11 home runs in 17 games to me with the EVs you
That's
mentioned,
Barry
and
Bonds, right?
yeah, exactly. He's striking out at a 30% clip, well below average walk rate and whiff rate. I think he can be a solid producer for power and stolen bases? Yes, absolutely. He's got 20 home run seasons in the minor leagues, but you look at the average. This was a guy that wasn't hitting north of 250. OBPs were in the 300, 310 range. This I feel like we're going to see the average come crashing down hard. Do I think he can still be a reliable source of power and stolen bases in the future? Yes, but the current expectations that he maintain his current pace of play as a 300 plus hitter with plus power and plus speed, I don't see that long term.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. 30.7 K percent, 7.2 walk percentage. Really interesting. Uh, his profile doesn't scream Aristides Aquino for me, but it's getting
No,
close. Um, we've seen great production, obviously, but for me, what makes him at least a big leaguer is the 50% pull rate. It's at 51.6 right now, and that plays in San Francisco, clearly, right? We've seen every single one of his home runs except for one that went to dead center, go to left field. So the kind of the Nolan Arenado approach of just pull the ball, pull your hands in and pull the ball. Is this a guy that you're looking at as a starter for 2025, or is this a guy that you'll be looking at as kind of like a bench utility bat?
I mean, we'll see where the ADP is at. If this is someone I'd have no problem drafting in kind of the back half of drafts. I think realistic expectations of double digit home runs, double digit stolen bases, just completely well within reason. That's a guy for fantasy. That's not bad. I think 2020 with, albeit a low walk rate, high strikeout rate, low OBP is still well within play. Depending on the league you're in, that's still something that's going to carry that's just a profile that's going to carry some fantasy value. We'll see kind of where the ADP's at. But, when I'm drafting from my bench, this is a profile that I don't mind taking a shot on by any means. But we'll see kind of how he performs down the stretch. We'll see where the ADPs are at.
Yeah, and they're giving him a 99 sprint speed.
Absolutely. That did stick out to me as well. And that's kind of something I feel like really bodes well for his stolen bases long term, even if we see some regression in the power, which we will. He's not going to continue this home run pace. This is a guy like I can see the stolen bases kind of being higher than, kind of the 2020, even if the power takes a slight dip. And, even if we get maybe like a 15-35 guy. I mean, I don't hate that profile at all for when I'm looking at my bench slots.
Well, also, it depends daily or weekly. I think this is probably going to be a daily play as his career continues, more so than it would be a lock him in at a weekly format for fantasy. But you could really, I think, extract good value out of him if it is daily playing matchups.
Positional versatility is nice too.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's been between second base, shortstop, and the outfield. Only need, I think it's 10 appearances to carry that eligibility into the next season. So especially like with daily matchups, I love positional versatility. I love guys that can kind of move around. If somebody's going to sit, somebody I can move into that spot. Fitzgerald, if he carries that 3 positional eligibility, that's really going to help his value headed into drafts.
Well, yeah, and you talk about that position eligibility. I think too, with those of us that really enjoy prospects, the more players you have on your bench that offer more of that versatility means less players you have to have on your bench. It means more prospects that you can really take a shot on, and those are really important pieces for a team that is trying to build a dynasty. And we're moving back to starting pitcher, or kind of. I want to say moving into a breakout starting pitcher, but I guess that's why I have him on the list is because I really want to ask you is Spencer Schwellenbach for the Atlanta Braves, 24 years old, out of Nebraska, 4.04 ERA so far, 64 and 2/3 innings pitched. So he has lost rookie eligibility in those 64 and 2/3, 70 strikeouts with a 1.04 WHIP. Numbers look really good. The ERA is a little high, but he's a rookie. Baseball Savant's lit up red. Do you think this is a number 2 starter? Do you think this is a guy that, the Atlanta Braves have just developed? Or do you think there may be some worms in this profile?
I think this guy is a potential number 2 starter. I love what I've seen from Schwellenbach so far. You said the 4.04 ERA. I look at the 3.19 expected ERA. He's gotten some bad batted ball luck his first taste in the MLB. Then I look at kind of the 98th percentile chase rate and the 97th percentile base on ball rate. Those are 2 things that are really going to age well for his long-term outlook. And you also look at he's done a pretty good job limiting the hard contact, 42% ground ball rate, 5.1% barrel rate. That's something, there's a great framework here. And then you pair that with the Braves, an organization that is historically very good at developing types of arms like this. This is a guy I can see. I think he's a very strong starting pitcher 2 headed into next season for me, and a guy I can see as a potential starting pitcher 1.
Okay. Wow. That's good. I mean, the numbers are there for a 1, right?
Absolutely. Maybe a back end 1. We'll say back end 1. I'll specify that. I don't think we're looking at like a top 10, fantasy starting pitcher, but this is
like
a guy.
Freddie Peralta.
Yes, exactly. That's a great comp. I can see that, like I can see like maybe a 4th, 5th round ADP at some point down the road as a guy you're drafting as your first pitcher.
I being a Brewer fan, I had years and years of number 1 pitchers that were, like a Nick Neugebauer. Probably no one remembers that name, or Glennon Rush. And it's funny because you're right. When you say a number 1, it's like, okay, well, there are 30 teams. There are 10 teams, so 1/3 of teams that we actually think of as really good ace pitchers, and then there are 2/3 of number 1s who are like pretty good, and then some are horrible. So, yeah, I think Freddie kind of falls right in line where it's like, yeah, this definitely would be the best pitcher on the Oakland A's tomorrow if he went over there. If you had to choose between Schwellenbach and Hurston Waldrop, obviously 2 very different 2024 profiles. Long term, who are you preferring to roster?
Schwellenbach. And I say
Easy,
that
right?
because and I love Waldrop. I think from an upside perspective, he does get the edge for me. But it's like I want the guy that doesn't have the reliever risk. I want the guy that's going to stick as a starter. I want the guy that's got really good command, and also he's an above average in strikeouts and whiffs too. that's a profile that I have a lot more confidence in long term, at least, albeit maybe not, an elite producer, but just a steady producer atop a rotation. So I would say Schwellenbach.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm in agreement with you. Again, this is one of those things kind of like we had mentioned about Vientos, where coming into the year, if you said Schwellenbach would outperform Waldrop, I wouldn't be surprised. But if you told me that it would be a significant margin in their long-term projectability, I would be. And that's where we are, right?
It's actually a question I was wondering if you'd ask, because I remember just seeing Waldrop starts. He was very hittable. The
Hmm.
control was shaky. There were starts he was kind of walking four guys. Then there were starts he'd go double-digit strikeouts and not walk a guy. And it's just, that was when I kind of started, to, look at him. I loved his upside coming up. He was one of my favorite starting pitchers in the 2023 draft outside of Skeens. And that's kind of when I'm like, okay, this is a guy that's like a tier two pitching prospect, tier two, tier three pitching prospect. There's some reliever risk here. There's questions about whether the command is going to hold up. Now with how Schwellenbach has performed, I think there's a sizable gap there between the two.
Well, and what's crazy is I think at this point, Waldrop might not even be he might not be the best pitcher out of his own college and draft class from that college. We're going to talk about Brandon Sproat a little bit later, but that's another thing that we just wouldn't have forecasted or ever projected.
Not at all.
And yeah, not at all. With what we were seeing, and I think that's what I've seen from Waldrop this year is just he wasn't ready. Like he needed more time. He needed to settle in at AAA. He needed to really learn how to pitch against the next tier of hitters. And the Braves just didn't give him that opportunity, right? They called him up and they gave him the shot to perform at the major league level, and then he had the elbow inflammation. So I'm not writing Waldrop off. I think he needs to go and be developed more. I would like to maybe see him go to Arizona fall with that month that he missed with the elbow inflammation.
Agreed.
Um, and I think 2025 we've got to see him back at AAA, and he's got to be at AAA until like June or July, right? Like
Yeah.
he's got to build that pedigree up because he can't pitch yet at the major league level. Like
I,
his splitter has been so good, but go ahead.
I would say so. He's back now, right?
Hmm.
I think he's back in AAA now. Let's say he finishes the year there. Then let's say the AFL goes good. I would love to see him in big league camp. I would love to. And early 2025 was really my timeline, that I had in my head for him
Okay.
when he was coming up. I'm like, okay, I don't think we're going to see this guy this year, but early 2025, they've got Fried as an impending free agent. He's going to command
Yep.
over 200 million. When you look at the Braves historically, they don't negotiate with their free agents, whether it be Freddie Freeman or Dansby Swanson. I think there's a very strong probability they're going to have a very sizable gap in that rotation. So I think early 2025, he's going to have every opportunity to prove he can stick in the rotation at the big league level.
Do you think there is? I'm pivoting here a little bit. Same team. Do you think there is absolutely any chance Ian Anderson, now that he's back from Tommy John, can give us shades of the usable starting pitcher that he was in the postseason before things kind of fell off the tracks?
I'm never going to say never when it comes to an organization like the Braves and just their track record of pitching development. I mean, if you would have told me Reynaldo Lopez would be a Cy Young front runner when they signed him, I would have laughed. This is an organization you just can't doubt when it comes to their pitchers. Sure, have they had some misses? Yes. But, this is an organization, I take every pitching prospect that they have. And it's like when I read, like, what the, 99th percentile, highest upside might be, I'm like, okay, this is a plausible scenario.
Did the Braves
So
draft Caminiti this year? They did, right?
yes, they
Yeah,
did.
yeah, of course they did. When we have on this list for our listeners, we have a number of players that we're not going to touch on today, and we're going to save those for later episodes when we have you on. But Ronaldo Lopez is one of those players, and you're right. He, much like Garrett Crochet, was a guy on that list for me coming to 2024 that was like, I'd like to have some shares because there was at one point top pedigree with Ronaldo Lopez. For those that don't remember, he was with the Nationals part of the Lucas Giolito trade for Adam Eaton, and he just was never good. But to your point, like maybe Ian Anderson can do the same thing, who was formerly a first round pick as well. Maybe they can get him back into shape. Maybe that injury had affected him for a number of years and we didn't know.
Perhaps this is, I believe, second Tommy John for him.
Is that
Results.
yeah?
I think first was 2016. So
Okay.
I always have to temper expectations when it comes to that because the results are just such a mixed bag. You've got some guys that really blossom, like Nathan Evaldi, to name one, but you've got a lot of guys that second one just completely derails their career. So yeah, I am going to temper my expectations on that, but I do think even if they can get back end starter production from him and have that front three of Strider, Schwellenbach, Sale, and Lopez, and there's not really a ton of pressure on Anderson to really step up, fill that Max Fried type void. You know, even without Max Fried, that four that I mentioned there, that's a pretty dang good rotation. You fill in like a guy like Waldrop or Anderson as that number 5. I mean, that's a rotation I'd put up there with some of the best in the game.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That 5 is really just don't screw things up, and you have that depth piece at 5 because AJ Smith-Shawver is kinda still hanging around as well.
Yeah, that's
Um,
another guy that could be in that running as well.
yeah, but perfect position. Those guys should be 5s, right? We haven't seen anything out of them at the major league level on a consistent basis to say that they're anything more than 5s at this point. But that is how baseball was supposed to work. You step into that 5 rotation, and through time, you develop and you become a better pitcher. You know, we just expect these kids to come up and be Jacob deGrom. Moving on, we have Jack Flaherty up next.
Did
I
you
would,
want to touch on Sprout? I think we missed
yeah. Should
Sprout.
we
Yeah,
circle
let's
around to
circle
Sprout?
back. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a couple MILBers, so minor leaguers that on this list today. Sprout and DeVries are going to be the two names that we talk about. Sprout, University of Florida, 2023 draft pick by the Mets. Big time control issues coming out of Florida. Something that to the point that was questioning whether he'd ever be able to make a major league roster. And now we see him completely 180. Control is in line, if not a plus, and velocity is up in a big way, hitting 100 miles an hour on multiple pitches this past start, 13 Ks in 5 1/3 innings. Oh, and he has gotten to the point where people are calling him number one pitching prospect in baseball. I think that's because of a lack of upside talent, maybe, or upside production might be a better word. But I like what I've seen, and in a lot of ways, for me, he is the Wyatt Langford of pitchers just a year later. What do you think for long term expectations?
Yeah, so I absolutely love what I've seen from Sprout. You know, entering the draft, you kind of mentioned the control issues, and that kind of even continued in high A. 15.7% based on ball rate, walk rate. But then you kind of look at double A, cuts that in half, 6.5%, just absolutely dominant there. 2.45 ERA, 0.87 WHIP, 77 to 15 strikeout to walk ratio. Long term, this is a guy. These are frontline starter numbers. Do I think that happens late this season? No. Do I think that happens 2025? Yes, absolutely. I think that's very much in play. And to me, you mentioned number one pitching prospect. I'll say tier one pitching prospect.
Good. Yeah.
He's a top 30 overall prospect for me. No argument there. He's my number 5 overall starting pitcher prospect. I think the only guys I have ahead of him are Jackson Jobe, Noah Schultz, Andrew Painter, and Chase Burns. So it's those really like elite top pitching prospects with top of the rotation upside. Those are still the guys that. But he's in that same tier. I think, I think the Langford analogy is a really good one. This is a guy that just completely is just shot up, rankings boards. I remember kind of early in the season, I wasn't so bought in yet. I'm like, okay, this is a top 100 guy for me,
Yep.
but I need
Same.
to see a little more. I need to see a little more before he's kind of pushing that tier one pitching prospect status. But he's shown me that and then some. The strikeout stuff is legit. I mentioned he cut the walk rate over in half. That came with actually a slight uptick in his strikeout rate in Double A. Much deserved promotion to Triple A. And I think at this point, if he gets a few good starts together there, a September call up, that's got to be in play.
Yeah, this is why I love prospects because again, looking at last year's draft, you had Paul Skeens, you had Waldrop, you had Noble Meyer, you had Thomas White, you had Travis Sakura. You had some names that we were excited about, and all of them have done very well, honestly, at a different level here or there. And then you have the pop up guys like Sprout, like that's prospecting, right? Like that is the idea. It gets to an organization, which I think now we have to look at the Mets and say they're doing something special at the minor league level. We haven't seen the fruits of that labor yet, but you have Christian Scott. Now you have Brandon Sproat, Blake Tidwell, Vassell. Like they've done a number of interesting things with their pitching prospects. Would you say that
Abs-
this is an organization you're keeping an eye on?
Yes, and I think ever since Stearns was brought in, it's
Yeah.
really changed my perspective of really the Mets player development. You said we've seen a lack of fruits. I mean, I think we've seen Mark Vientos blossom from you
Hmm.
know just completely overmatched to a big league regular in the span of a year. I think you've kind of got to give him credit for that. They've drafted very well. You've seen Jonah Tong as another pitching prospect that's
Yep.
been kind of shooting up the ranks in their system. Christian Scott, as you mentioned, there's really a lot to like. I really, and yes, I do think this is the Mets going forward, just with the infrastructure they have there in the front office, with kind of the we've seen I would say like the top of the cream, start to live up to their big league expectations. It's definitely an organization I'm watching very closely with their player development and their drafting going forward.
Well, yeah, and my comment was more gauged at the idea that we are about to see that fruit kind of blossom and
Yeah,
develop, and I think for especially for us for prospectors, that's kind of the key indication is you want to find the organizations before they pop because after they've popped, every single prospect in their system is going to be under a magnifying glass that much more. But like you talked about, some of the names even beyond their main prospects, and it's like they're building something really special. Like this pipeline is going to be really strong. We didn't even talk about Brett Batty, who's kind of starting to turn it around in the minor leagues. Acuna, right? They have a number of players. Gilbert, Jet Williams, who's been out for the year. Like those guys are
Ryan,
all going
Ryan
to be
Clifford as
coming up.
well.
What'd you say?
Ryan Clifford as well.
Ryan Clifford as well. Like
Yeah,
it's a lot of assets if Cohen decides he wants to compete again. If he wants to spend money and bring some of these kids up and trade some of these kids, the New York Mets could be very dangerous if they're
absolutely.
developing pitchers like Sprout.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think we have to look at it as a lot of these organizations that develop really well, there's that payroll element there. You look at
Hmm.
this with the Brewers, you see this with the Rays, you see this with a lot of the small markets, even the Marlins. They develop pitching very well, but they don't kind of spend on the bats to supplement that. You now look at the Mets, and if this, we'll see. I think I still need to see a few more of their guys pop up and perform before I'm kind of fully behind them as a top developmental organization. But you pair that with the money aspect. This is absolutely a team, as you mentioned, that could be very dangerous for the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Especially with what we've seen commitment to winning, right? Like we know when the button is there, they're going to hit it. I even think this year they overperformed what they expected. And I think there's probably conversations in the front office of do we go for it or do we not go for it? I'm glad they
Yeah.
chose to just kind of chill because they've held on to those assets in which they acquired last year. Now they
Yes.
paid for them literally by paying the contracts of Verlander and Scherzer, but assets are assets. Okay, a couple more names here before we get to DeVries. Jack Flaherty. We don't have to touch on him too much, but are we buying this or are we actively trying to sell him as an ace this offseason?
I feel like I'm behind it, honestly.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and he feels like a lot older, but he's only 28 years old. Whiff rate, strikeout rate, base and ball rate are kind of near the top percentile of the league. Expected ERA kind of backs up where he's at with his ERA. Expected batting average kind of backs up his average. There's nothing really in his on his Savant page, just in his profile, that really points to really steep regression. I mean, of course, there's going to be something to do with landing spot. That could determine it. Whether he kind of keeps this up, or whether we see maybe a starting pitcher 2, starting pitcher 3 going forward. But
Man, if he
you know,
goes to
at,
the Giants, could you
at,
I would salivate.
at his age, yeah, and that's a great landing spot for him, just kind of with that park being such a pitcher's park. But just kind of with his age, just what he's been able to do, in Detroit. Am I kind of full behind like starting pitcher 1 in drafts? No. This is a guy that in a span of a year I've gone from wanting to avoid in drafts entirely to like this is a guy, if I'm looking for that second or third guy in my rotation, this is a guy that's I'll draft. I don't have an issue with it. Don't really see anything in his profile that really kind of points to stark regression. This is a guy that, to me, I think we're looking at a top 20 dynasty starting pitcher.
Yeah, I mean the numbers are insane. 31.8% K rate, best of his career. Closest he came was 2018 with a 29.6 and then a 29.9 in 2019. But the walk rate, Owen, I mean, 4.5. It's remarkable. Coming off a 10.2 last year, a 13.2 the year before, 8.1, 9.4, 7.1, 9.6, 10.6. I mean, he has halved his career best. And I think that's the biggest piece. And I was waiting for this for years with Jack Flaherty, and I kind of wish I would have bought into more about what he said last year when he was leaving St. Louis, which was he did not have kind words for that organization. He did not have kind words for that organization's medical department or the pitching department and development. And here we are, him coming out of Detroit with these great numbers. I think I was at least a little tentative because of the absolute horror that we saw in Baltimore last year. I thought leaving St. Louis, he might go to Baltimore and turn into this. When he didn't, I thought, okay, he's broken. And I stayed away from him in drafts. So it's great to see if he stays with the Dodgers, if he goes to the Giants. I had talked with Doc last week. I had interactions with Jack working in the industry that I work in. He loves Los Angeles. He has friends in Los Angeles. Like he hangs out there. This was a great fit for him, and I thought there was more beyond just that. But I think we might see him stay out west. The only team I would really be devastated if he signs with is the Angels.
Yeah.
I don't.
Uh, yeah, I say same. And I think you did mention really the stark increase in kind of the walk rate. That does put some kind of question as kind of how much does really the infrastructure have on it? How much does the coaching staff have in play? Is he going to land with an organization that wants to kind of tweak some things for the worse? Sure, it's certainly a possibility, but I think for now this is a guy that where my confidence has kind of gone from minimal to you know good spot drafting him, albeit at the right spot in kind of
Yeah.
in fantasy drafts next year. And as he's still 28 at an age where you could reasonably expect a pitcher to still have some productive years ahead. So yeah, I'm excited for him in next season. And although I don't not fully behind that we'll kind of get a repeat of this season, I think we're still looking at a good starting pitcher.
Do you remember when Zach Wheeler left New York and signed with Philly? Were you
I I was younger, but yes, I do remember.
I feel like this could be a similar situation. Now, Flaherty's having a better year than Wheeler did, but I bring up Wheeler because he was one of the very few free agent pitchers that has worked out really, really, really well for the organization. Didn't incur a Tommy John or a shoulder injury, has been able to pitch the entirety of the contract, so much so that he signed a second contract. And I think kind of to what you were just saying with the age, like Flaherty provides that possible opportunity as well. The only concern I have is the Yankees and the medical story, right? Where they had a deal in place and medicals came up and they backed out of the deal. But those are things we'll wait and see. I think we'll know based off his contract, but how much
Yeah,
excitement there is, right? If he signs a Carlos Rodon deal like Rodon did with the Giants, I think there's a lot to be worried about. But if he signs a 4 or 5 year deal, it's like, well, no organization's giving him $100 million if they're genuinely concerned about his shoulder, his elbow, right?
yeah, no, and you look at what when Wheeler first signed, he had a lengthy injury history up to that point. There wasn't really
Yep.
any denying the talent, but it was kind of health permitting. I feel like you can really look at Flaherty with that same regard. When he's been healthy, he had a great year with the Cardinals. I believe 2019 it was. Now still 28 years old. Healthy, having a very good year. But yeah, there's certainly going to be those questions there. Does he get kind of a contract where are teams kind of fully bought in yet? We'll see, as you said. And I think, a Rodon deal, it's still very possible, with an opt out, kind of needs one more year to really truly cash in. But even then, if he lands in kind of a good organization, good landing spot, I'm not too worried about it.
If I were a GM, I would just do the Blake Snell, Jack Flaherty, Carlos Rodon. I just get two of them every year. Yes, I'm committing 60 plus $1 million, but if I get 2 solid weeks out of these guys, I'm talking about blue chip prospects at the deadline if I want, except for Blake Snell because he will surely pitch terrible up until the deadline, and then right after the deadline, he'll be otherworldly. That was my bit of humor for the episode. Moving on, last hitter before we get to DeVries and then finally talk about our mock draft. Xavier Edwards, really surprising 2024. I'll be honest, Owen, I didn't think we'd ever see a breakout or a potential breakout from Edwards. I thought he was going to kind of be lost to the systems. This is a former Padre who had been traded over in a former deal. But I think there's a chance we're talking about a really useful fantasy player long term. What do you think?
I'm kind of bearish, and
Okay.
I'm not denying the speed. I think, and the average, he's looked great in that department so far. What I do have a lot of concerns about are, does kind of the glove kind of fuel that regular playing time for him? You look at that, the range -3, that's in the bottom third percentile. Arm strength is in the bottom third percentile as well, and then just the lack of power. I mean, this is 2.1% barrel rate, like that's just not where you want to see it. Hard hit rate 27.1%. His expected slugging is 353. That's just not what you want to see in the power department. So I can see like I think like Tommy Edman is a decent comp for him. Like maybe best absolute best case scenario, you're getting like 10 home runs and a pretty good average. I don't think he'll be like a 300 plus hitter guy. I think we can see like 280, 290. I can see that, and then he'll give you 30, 40 stolen bases. That's kind of the profile I see. So I feel like it's an okay fantasy player, but not a guy that I'm drafting as a starter.
Yeah, I'm really torn here. In our notes, I kind of it was the hot take highlight, which is just, is he the next Luis Arias? I think that's a very interesting profile. Their EVs are very similar. Arias this year is an 86.4. Edward is a 87. His exit velo, if there's anything to be really excited about, is up 5 miles per hour. His average exit velo. So that's also sample size. Like you said, that's not enough to get me excited about the power. The power is going to be a bugaboo. There's no way around it. But if he can at least hit, like you said, 280, 290, I think he's way more valuable than Luis Arias, because Arias provides almost no speed, 4 stolen
Yeah.
bases on the year,
And,
right? Like,
and I would actually, even at this point with the small sample size, it's a profile I'm much more optimistic going forward about than Arias. You look at
yeah.
Arias's profile, he doesn't strike out at all, but he doesn't walk. He's
Mhm.
he's really kind of a singles guy. You look at Edwards, this guy doesn't strike out, albeit not qualified, but 16.8% strikeout rate. That's great to see. 17.9% whiff rate. Chase rate is kind of where you want to see as well. 13.1% walk rate. So this is a guy where even if he doesn't offer much, kind of with extra base hits in the power department, which I don't think he will, he's still kind of going to get he's going to help you in OBP leagues. I look at the average. I think we're going to see like a regression to the mean come in that department soon. I mean, he's hitting 388 now. I don't think anything well north of 300 is a reasonable expectation going forward. But I look at the rest of the profile, and I don't hate it long term, just with kind of the reasonable expectation that we're not getting much for power, and he's going to be kind of a on base speed guy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. That's what he is, right? He's an on-base speed guy, but
Yeah,
um, we don't have many of those guys left. And
that's true.
I I don't know. There's just something in this profile that excites me, and I say excites me, like, this is a back half of the draft next year guy. Like, I'm not gonna
Mm.
get trapped in the Luis Arias, bear claw that is,
Yeah,
they take him in the 4th or 5th round, which is absolutely ludicrous. Like, there's late value here, and I think there's late value in an immense way, but only if it's late value.
yeah.
You look at
No,
him.
this
Go
is a
ahead.
guy I want for my bench.
Yeah.
If this is
Yes.
it, like let's just take the same format we have. Let's say 15 team, 28 round draft. This is a guy I'm not looking at until round 20. I'm not even those middle
Yeah.
rounds when I kind of still want
But I'm
those starting
excited him I'm
positions filled
excited to
out.
have him at 20,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Like, yeah, if
yeah,
he
yeah,
falls to
yeah.
me, awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that it's like I feel like it's kind of fitting because that's the same. I took Edmund at 22. Like sure, maybe I got the injury discount there, but I feel like that kind of profile, that's a range where yeah, this is a guy I kind of want for my bench if I feel like I haven't kind of got, if I don't have enough production in stolen bases OBP with the rest of my lineup. Not a guy I'm drafting on expecting to be kind of a full top option at his position in an everyday role.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great comment, right? He is the guy that fills in for the guy that let you down. And
Yes.
if that's the case and he's performing, you're stoked. And if he's a guy that you have to drop, then he's a guy you have to drop. I mean, oh, in 2023 and 2024 numbers are get me excited. AAA 351 with a 429 OBP. He had 30 strikeouts to 52 walks in 2023, and then 2024 330 average. Fell off a little bit. That would be this year. He had 26 games, 376 OBP, 11 strikeouts to 8 walks. I still think there's some development at the major league level, but you're right. 380 is outrageous. I think maybe peak performance, we could see a 330 season from him at the major league level. And if we get a 330 and he can give us any bit of that OBP that he had from 2023, we could be talking about a 330, 50 stolen base kid.
Yeah, no, I won't even rule out 330. I do think, albeit a better bit of a better fantasy profile than a rise, I do think this is a guy that entering drafts next year, if he keeps up this performance, is going to be it's going to be an overrated profile going into fantasy drafts, because this is a guy that he's going to help you in a couple categories, but this is a guy I can see, being drafted in the front half of drafts for kind of regular, everyday production across all categories, and it's just I can't get behind that. So I'm definitely still tempering my expectations.
He would have that helium of a rise, right? That 4th, 5th, 6th round, and it's like that's just too much to.
That's when I'm out. That's so we'll certainly see how it goes. There's still a lot of telling to do as to kind of where he ends up on draft boards, but overall, I think we could be looking at a solid big leaguer, but the fantasy value doesn't quite reflect that.
Yeah, former first-round pick. He was a compensation pick, 38th overall by the Padres. I want to say, do you remember, was he in the Blake Snell deal?
Yes, he was, and then he was traded by the Rays for Santiago Suarez.
Damn,
with JT Sharkpaw. Yeah,
fantastic.
No, I was just writing about Suarez, so okay. That's where I remember that from.
Yeah, no, he man, I remember him getting picked by the Padres, and just he had one of those profiles, kind of like CJ Abrams, but even worse, where you're like, why am I paying attention to this guy in fantasy at all? And then he bounces around to multiple teams, and now here we are again. Like, Mark Vientos, Xavier Edwards. It's crazy to think about 4 or 5 years ago and how these guys actually come to fruition as players.
Absolutely. And I will say, being on the Marlins, there's not a ton of guys coming up that are kind of going to heavily compete with him for playing time, in my opinion. So I actually like where he's at.
Oh, dude, your best friend might just fight him for playing time down there.
Yeah, no, I mean it's like he's got absolutely nothing. Like that job is absolutely his to lose, and I think that's kind of where like I can get a little bit more behind the profile. If you were kind of on a contending team, had like a regular there, then I'd kind of be a bit more quick to fade. But I'm interested to see how the rest of the season goes.
I haven't seen by position what he's been playing this year. Let's see here. Appearances. Shortstop, 31 games. Okay, so he's only played 1 game at second base. So Norby probably wouldn't affect him at all. But okay, here's an interesting question. Would you rather have Edwards in Dynasty or Connor Norby?
You're asking the wrong person this.
I know. We're in the same boat here. We're Norby haters after what happened to you. I'm on your side here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd take Edwards too, just because.
I think I've got to go Edwards. I've got to go the proven guy, because I feel like what we're seeing from Edwards, this is like maybe safely what we can expect from Norby.
Yeah,
with a worse approach, I would add. So I think that the approach is kind of where Edwards gets the edge for me. Yeah. Not saying that I think Norby can still be a big leaguer. I think he can still be a just okay producer, but give me the proven guy with kind of the similar profile plus the approach over the prospect.
Yeah, I mean the approach is in my opinion significantly better. The speed speed usage is probably better. I'm sure they might, from the sprint speed, they might actually have similar speed, but Edwards has proven to be able to utilize stolen bases more. And then you just talk about the elite level contact. You have elite possible skill sets here, where Norby, I think the biggest issue that we've had is just the simple fact that he's very Dansby Swanson-esque, right? At his peak, he's kind of meh. He's a better real life baseball player than he is a fantasy player. Absolutely. And that's I think, right, that's kind of been our takeaway. It's just
I think Norby, he's also kind of like the the Drew Gilbert type, where he's going to be productive in a few categories, but he doesn't have that plus that plus area. And that's kind of really what I feel like kind of holds his fantasy value down, is because when I'm drafting for fantasy, I want a guy where, I want kind of well-rounded production across all categories, but I want a guy who does like one particular thing really well in addition to that. Norby, to me, just doesn't have that.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat you are, and that's the thing we're looking for, high upside skill production, right? So that we
Absolutely.
can tap into that. Okay, last name before we move on to the draft. We're at about 15 minutes, so we'll shoot through our draft pretty quickly.
Okay.
I do want to talk about DeVries, number one international signing this past J15 by the Padres. Big time money handed out. Slow start to the year. They did assign him to A ball, that is, which is, it's a tall task for a 17-year-old kid. He'll be turning 18 this fall. So this is his full age 17 season. But over the last month and a half, we've really seen DeVries start to hit and showcase some big time power. So much so that we have prospectors around the industry talking about him potentially being a number one overall type profile of a prospect down the road. What are your thoughts, and where's your level of excitement for DeVries long term?
Yeah. So he just won. You mentioned big, huge month of July. Just won California League Player of the Month. 318, 442, 694, 8 home runs, 18 RBIs, 18 walks to 18 strikeouts. Approach is just incredible for this past month in particular. To me, you mentioned this is 65 grade raw power, 60 grade hit tool. The the K percentage for a 17-year-old in 8 ball, 24.5%. That's very respectable. You'll get the 13.7% walk rate, pair that with his hit tool, and going forward, this is a guy I'm extremely excited about. And I will say I was plenty critical about the Padres' resource management at the deadline. I don't think parting off with the top prospects they did to add two relievers when the closer situation is pretty well held down. Jeremiah Estrada is a solid setup guy. I was critical of the resource management there, but I really do think going forward, keeping DeVries and not kind of including him in a package for a Crochet or a Scoople or a top guy could go down as one of their best decisions at the deadline. You said number one overall prospect. I actually just wrote that down in my notes as well. This is a guy I can definitely see as a future number one overall prospect. I think I think he's really, as a 17-year-old in A-ball, I weigh like age level pretty heavily. He's really played himself into that same discussion down the stretch, with a Walker Jenkins, Colt Emerson, that I can see as my number one prospect by the end of the year.
Yeah, and I don't know. What are your thoughts in regards to like the hype? I call it the hype train for DeVries as well as Salas. Salas because
Yeah.
he was 16 part of the year last year, got all of this excitement, right? This kid's supposed to be a junior in high school, maybe even an older sophomore, and then gets promoted to high A and then quickly to double A, and those numbers quickly fall off. And here is Salas back at high A this year as a 17-year-old, really struggling. DeVries, I don't feel like has gotten the same kind of excitement and helium because we saw the downfall of Salas a little bit. But
Yeah.
I personally think what DeVries is doing is way more impressive than what Salas did last
Absolutely.
year.
And,
Yeah.
and I think in Solis's defense, I definitely think they shook his confidence a little bit.
Hmm.
Just bringing him up to Double A in his first professional season, it was just a horrible decision developmentally. And I think reasonably, had they done that same thing with DeVries, we'd be seeing half of what we're seeing now. So, but yes, I think just what he's doing, the approach still being, average age in A ball, I believe, is like 19. So he's still 2 years below that, still 2 years below the average age of the competition there. And to see what he's doing there, just one of the best hitters in July this past month. The approach has been great. Hit tool's great. Raw power's great. Um, just a guy that can stick at shortstop long term. This is a guy that I view with really more helium than Salas going forward.
Yeah, and I was looking for his splits because I know DeVries is a switch hitter, and I know that from the right side he's showing significant more power, and from the left side there's still some work to be done. Still a good hitter, but this will be something interesting to monitor because I don't remember a switch hitter showing more power from the right than the left since Ozzy Albies came up. Ozzy is big time power from the right. So it'll be interesting to track that because of the field of play. Padres,
Yeah,
Petco Park being a more challenging hitter environment, but I don't think it's going to matter for DeVries.
absolutely.
He's looking like a stud.
And I will say, like, the approach is really what stands out to me.
Hmm.
I can't recall the last time I saw like a 17-year-old in 8 ball with the same number of strikeouts as walks over a month period. It just doesn't happen. I think and just the eye to me, that's something that's really going to help him as he goes forward. And this is someone I can see him. I could see him in the majors by 20.
Yeah, yeah, they got kind of a Soto approach, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, you bring a really good point. You look at some of the biggest and best performers, age to level, usually have that approach. I think of Jackson Churio, even Ethan Salas last year. I mean, how many times do we see even an 18-year-old at A ball? It's perform well. That is,
Yeah, yeah.
it's not seen.
And a lot of guys DeVries's age, they're just getting signed or they're in the
Hmm.
DSL.
Yeah,
So really, to see him at A ball and quite frankly putting up better numbers than some of these guys in the DSL, that I feel like he's really not getting enough helium for just how good he's been. Sure, is it exciting to see a guy get moved up 3 levels in their first pro season? Absolutely, but I think the Padres learned from their mistake with Salas, and they're not making that same mistake with DeVries, and we're now seeing just how high his upside can be, and we're seeing a positive trajectory for him going forward.
yeah. I haven't done any pre prep for J15 this year. I'm really interested to see who the Padres are targeting. I also think it'll be interesting with international money if Sasaki comes over because he would have to fall in line with the Otani where he doesn't take a big deal. Like there's so many moving pieces to J15 and international
Absolutely.
signings. I just have to believe that the Padres know what they're doing now.
Absolutely, and and
um,
and, and I have read that there are teams that are preparing for the possibility that Sasaki is posted, and I think
yeah,
you look at a team like the Padres. This is really how they've kind of kept their system middle of the pack, despite all the subtractions they've made from their minor league to add to the big league roster the past few years. They've made splashes in the international pool. Solis was a top prospect coming up. DeVries was a top guy coming up. The past, I think safely the past 3 4 years they've had very good international crops coming up. So this is a team you have to, and especially after seeing the success they've had with DeVries, you've got to expect they'll be back at it on that January 15th signing period with another splash to add to the farm system.
well, yeah, and I think the biggest thing is you kind of talked about the packages that they gave up this trade deadline. I think when you really look at some of these names, a lot of it for them is asset management. And I say that because if you look at these names, there's a risk for a number of these players losing graded pedigree. And I say that with if you think Dylan Lesko was a minus coming into the year like I did, you would have to view him now as a B minus or a C plus. Now, if he goes out there and continues to struggle with command, he could drop even lower than a C plus. So I think what AJ Preller is really doing is he's just cutting his losses. Now, I think Dylan Lesko is a bad cut,
Yeah,
personally.
so I will say with the Lesko is a guy that I've been lower on. I
Okay.
really don't. I have too many questions about the control and the command to really get behind the front of the rotation upside, the really pure strikeout stuff. So that one I was less. I wasn't, and the Rays, they're kind of closer by committee. Adam, I feel like was traded more to be a setup guy. That one I kind of understood, but the Scott deal to me it just made no sense. Like I don't understand. You've already kind of added to a very good bullpen. Snelling, he had a sub 2 ERA just as recently as a year ago between 3 levels of the minor leagues as a 19-year-old. This is a guy that still I feel like could go towards maybe acquiring a bat for the back end of that lineup or a starting pitcher. I feel like Flaherty was a guy they should have been in on. Given the injuries that they've had and kind of the young guys they've had to bring up. So I don't really think it was the great. It was
Yeah.
really asset management. Lesko was a guy I was lower on. I do think in an organization like the Rays, they are a team that he can really thrive with. Maybe they can fix the control issues at least to an extent, but I
He
didn't really
reminds me
like
a
that
lot
Scott
of,
deal for them.
he reminds me a lot of Baz, and I think it's just because, they have the long blonde hair. But Lesko and Baz just they seem to have a similar makeup, at least with the way they throw. So maybe they can kind of reshape Lesko it the same way they did with Baz. Although Baz, when he came over from Pittsburgh, was dominating. He should never have been traded from Pittsburgh. That deal in general was horrendous.
Oh yeah.
Um, oh man. Yeah, no, I agree with you. When you think about the Tanner Scott being a unrestricted free agent and what they gave up in Snelling for him, amongst other pieces, and then you look at Jack Flaherty, like I agree with you. I would have rather had Flaherty because at least
Like
then
and you
also,
look at you look at the cost perspective. It was
yeah,
Lirizano and Sweeney from the Dodgers. Lirizano was, I believe, a top 10 guy, and Sweeney was kind of a back end guy. You can't tell me that if they offered the Tigers a Snelling and a Pauly for maybe a Flaherty, and you throw in a reliever in there, let's say a
Foley.
Chafin or Foley. Yeah, even better, Foley. I mean, that's got to be a competitive package right there.
Yeah, but
Just
I think the
given
industry
the
is
return.
right. I think people called Detroit, and either they had a deal in place with the Yankees as reported, or the answer was no. And, Preller said, "Screw it, I'll get Tanner Scott," right? Like, timing is everything, and I would be really fascinated to see, like, a Hard Knocks episode of trade deadline day in
Absolutely.
the
Oh, I'd
Tigers'
love that.
office. Like, how many times did that phone ring? How many times did you say no? And then how many times did the league office come back and say the deal is dead because medicals have not cleared him?
I
That would
feel like they kind
fascinating.
of Flaherty was that guy where they kind of waited too long, and because of
Yeah.
that, I feel like they almost had to take what was there. I feel like once the Astros got Kikuchi, that was kind of one big suitor off the table for them.
Mhm.
I definitely feel like they waited too long, and because of that, they kind of had to take a lesser package than what they would have gotten had they capitalized on kind of the earlier part of the deadline.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. It'll be interesting to see, if Sweeney and, Lorenzo can really is it Lorenzo?
Lozano, I think
Lozano, yeah,
yeah,
I mean, we liked him a lot this offseason. He's had a rough year, but, he has a chance in the system to develop. Okay,
absolutely agree.
we're at about an hour. Let's just quick touch on our mock draft. You and I did a 15-team startup dynasty draft. The context was it is 2024 starting, so we're backtracking. That's kind of a nice piece with this dynasty draft is we know who has performed well. So guys like Juan Soto obviously having a massive season, kind of I think move up in the ranks because of that, and then forecasting moving forward. But another name that really caught my attention, a guy that I actually took, was Seth Lugo for the Royals, having an absolutely remarkable year. I know that those stats are going to carry with me down the road. And then so 2024, 2025 moving forward, I was darn it, what pick was I?
You were four.
4? I was 4. And you were
Yeah.
15?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we were in very different parts of the draft. We both loved our draft, but I want you to kind of start it off and just talk about what your approach was, some players that you took that you really liked, and talk about how you built your draft.
Yeah, so I hate picking at the back half of the draft. It's really just don't like not a I like kind of getting that like still I like being in the middle, that like 6-7 guy, get that elite guy, then you're still getting a good talent in the second round. But I feel like getting Corbin Carroll and Tarek Skubal at that kind of 1-2 turn, that was really like a best case. Like I was just enthusiastic to get those two, especially with Skeens going off the board at 1-5 to get Skubal over 10 picks later. Just I felt that was great value. Jackson Holiday in round 3 was another pick I really liked, especially with Merrill, Caminero, Chirrio, and Wood all off the board. Another one of my great value picks. I actually liked the back half of my draft better than the front half. Some of the picks I got in the back half, Tobias Myers in round 27 just felt like insane value. Young starter, ERA just over 3.
Traded
He's
for
looked
Junior
great so
Caminero
far.
too,
Yeah,
which people
yeah.
forget about. Yeah.
Yeah, and then a round earlier, Eric Fetty in round 26. The stats backtrack, as you mentioned, he's had a very good 2024 so far. Still 31 years old. And 28 was where I was actually looking at Reed Detmers there. That was kind of, I was really leaning heavily towards that. And in hindsight, I probably should have done that. I love Robert Kalaz, but given some of the prospects that weren't taken, I feel like Detmers would have been the better pick there. And then just circle back, get like a top priority waiver claim on Kalaz would have been the better route there. And earlier in the draft, when I kind of got uh, Paredes, Westberg, that was another pick of regret for me. I feel like I'd like my outfield a lot more had I gone kind of a Bretton Doyle there. And just given how the draft fell out, we saw names like Joey Ortiz and Michael Bush go much later. Colt Keith went in round 7. Alec Boehm in round 8. Probably would have been better just going a different position there. But
Yeah,
overall,
outfield
I really like my draft. Really like the prospects. I've picked up.
outfield was rough. We did a 5 outfield, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Outfield was hard. I I had to go Duran round 3. I went
yeah. I saw that
Gunner.
and I'm like, I don't know
Yeah.
about that. Yeah, round
Yeah.
3. But
No,
five
I hated it.
outfield, I don't blame you.
I hated it, but I was looking at it and I was saying, okay, I'm in a 5 outfielder league here. I have no outfielders. The last outfielder that was taken was, I mean, they were all taken from Churio, 2.9, Wood 2.10, I guess 2.10, Langford, Riley Green. So Duran is a 2020 guy. I like his breakout season, but I don't know if it's gonna be sort of looking for consistent, right? So that was rough. But outfield is as it was coming into the year. It's a shallow position. And I thought a lot of the prospect graduations were going to help that, but trying to fill out 5 outfielders was hard. But you're right. I actually liked the second half of this draft the most. I was able to get Hamilton in 27, Candelario in 26. And now these are guys I don't want to start, but these are guys that we kind of talked about earlier with Edwards. Like I would love to have them on my bench.
Yeah.
De Los Santos, 23rd round, Victor Scott, 22nd round. Huge discount of Victor Scott. Now, obviously, he hasn't performed the way we wanted him to in 2024, but I still think there's value there. Those are some of the big highlight picks for me, but I thought interesting that I'm going to run through some of just the notes that I have here. Soto at 1-3, coming off his stint with the Padres, that's a pretty damn high pick for Juan Soto. What are your thoughts?
I disagree. Actually, I think it's around fair value for him in
Okay.
Dynasty because you look at really the guys ahead of him. I feel like the only hitter with a strong argument that I would take higher is Bobby Witt Jr. Soto in an average OBP league, I'd still feel like there's an argument that he could be had over Gunnar. So I expected Soto anywhere from kind of 1-3 to 1-6.
Yep.
He's still 26 years old, still got some really good years ahead of him. It is a 5 outfield league. So the 1-3 for him, I don't hate it at all. It's
That's a
probably
good
something,
point.
had I been in that spot, he would have definitely been in the running for who I would have picked.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, you make a great point with the 5 outfielder. You want to get that one, as I kind of talked about earlier with taking Duran, right? If you can get that one as
Yeah.
Soto, you're in a great spot. I think for me, the only other name that I would have taken at 3 would have been Ellie. It just would have been hard to turn up the stolen bases.
I wouldn't have
Um,
gone Ellie that high. I would have had I think Gunnar was a guy I could
Gunner's your
put
guy.
higher. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like Ellie, but I feel like I expected him more actually end of round 1, like maybe 1-7 to 1-10 was kind of
Mhm.
where I would put him at. Just I definitely expected Judge to go higher. I expected Tucker probably to go higher as well. So he did go a little higher than I thought.
Yeah, it's interesting. Tatis still went 111. I would have rather had Ramirez, Betts, Alvarez, definitely Skubal. Honestly, I'm not even taking CJ Abrams over Tatis. I've just lost my love for Tatis, and that's not fully fair. Okay, next name. So I wanted to just talk on real quick. Royce Lewis went 312. So there's still some faith that maybe he can stay healthy. He actually went before Jackson Holiday. You took Holiday, 315. If you're in that position where Royce Lewis and Jackson Holiday are both on the board at 315, are you taking Lewis or are you taking Holiday still?
I'm still going Holiday, and I love Royce Lewis, I really do. But it's like I feel like you can't really ignore that health permitting is really a label that's kind of stuck with him his entire career, and one that isn't going away anytime soon. When he's out there, he's a very good player, but I feel like at that point in the draft, that's just not where I'm looking for those high risk, high reward players. I want the high risk when the cost is lower. I want the
Yeah.
high risk, in the later rounds where I took Tommy Edman. He's been out the entire year, but if he can get back to his 2023 numbers, that's great value at that pick. It's just,
Yeah.
and I assume it's personal preference as well. There are some guys who are perfectly fine taking that kind of high risk, high upside early. I'm not one of them. I want like a proven track record with kind of minimal downside at that point in the draft. So even Holiday was kind of breaking off my norm a little bit and kind of what I usually approach, but I feel like I still would have taken Holiday even if Lewis was still on the board.
Well, and this was a mock. Like, no matter how serious people take mocks, subconsciously, you're more inclined to be off path a little bit because you're not as invested. Literally, like it's a mock draft. Garrett Crochet, 4th round, 13th overall, kind of shows the discount you're still getting, which I think is a massive discount. Hunter Green, 5'10, Garrett Cole, 5'11, Luis Gill, 5'12. That was an interesting round for me. I think that was a massive teardrop, Owen. Out of those 3 names, I like Hunter Green the absolute most, especially in Dynasty. What did you
Agreed.
think of those? Right, Hunter Green, easy there.
Yeah, no, Hunter Green between those three he's the guy I want with Dynasty. What interested me especially about the Gill pick was you look one round down to round six, Logan Webb, Tanner Bybee,
Yeah.
Luis Castillo, Jared Jones, Shota Imanaga. There's still some great arms on the board that I feel like should have gone a little higher. Don't get me wrong, I love what kind of Gill has been done, but I feel like all those guys I mentioned that went around later would have been kind of the better picks at that spot.
Yeah, I think I'm never gonna be able to shake the Luis Gill. It is Luis Heel, right? It's pronounced
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, Basalo 6'7" was the next name of note, which I thought was, interesting. Sandwiched then with Baz and Webb. Baz 6'8", Webb 6'9". I thought it was really interesting that Baz went before Webb. Webb's not that old, and Baz is not really that young anymore for a prospect. Who would you rather have, Baz or Webb?
I would go Webb. I love like
Mhm.
Boz's. I believe the upside is still there with Boz. He's in a great organization. The strikeout stuff is there. Command is improved. But at that point, like I want the proven track record. As I mentioned earlier, I don't want to kind of take too much of a risk at that spot in the draft.
Yeah. Mason Miller 7'7", Colt Keith 7'8", Jackson Job 7'9". I thought this was interesting because you have, a dominant elite closer at 7'7". Organizationally, question marks. Colt Keith, prospect pedigree, but has struggled, but now is coming on of late. And then you have Jackson Job 7'9", who hasn't really shown the same kind of command he did last year, especially as of late. But we're still talking about a guy in my top 5 overall starting pitching prospects. I was shocked that he fell that far. What did you think?
I will say, like, given the names that went earlier, Basayo, Kobe Mayo, Junior Caminero, I am surprised that Job kind of lasted that far. I would have thought like a round five, round six is more where I'd put him at, not so much kind of towards the end of round seven. He was actually a guy I was looking at when I ended up going with Stephen Kwan. Him and Colt Keith were both guys that I was looking at with that pick at the end of the seventh, but not surprised that neither made it there.
Yeah, Kwanzaa, a strong major leaguer to pass up on for those names. Maybe not 6 months ago. That's probably an easy decision 6 months ago, but now it's a little bit more challenging.
Yeah,
I'm going to kind of blow through some of these here and just kind of touch on them after I'm done. If you have any thoughts, Bichette really falling at a 7-11 pick. Tovar and Neto 8-6 and 8-7 respectfully. Dylan Cruz, Evan Carter, Jordan Lawler 8-8, 8-9, 8-10. We're kind of getting into like, pick your upside territory. I like that Dylan Cruz fell this far. This is kind of where I'm feeling like the value for Dylan Cruz is. Tovar and Neto, I'd prefer Tovar, and then Bo Bichette out of all these guys. I think in a dynasty, like at 7-11, I love that value.
yeah. If you, I think if you know, I'm on the lower side on Bichette. I don't like the play discipline. I don't like how the approach is. I don't like how the approach is going to hold up. I don't think we're ever going to see him put up a 2021 type season again. Declining sprint speed, average has been on just a free fall since then. Power isn't going to carry the profile, but at that point in the draft, that's definitely a risk I would have been fine taking, just given his age. And I will say, you get to round 11, Noelvi Marte, I felt in round 11, just great value. This is a potential like five category guy. Rough start to this year, but the upside is still there. He's 23 years old, not far removed from being a uh, I'd argue tier one overall prospect. So I feel like round 11 was just great value for him. Some of the arms that fell into round 12 as well, Kyle Harrison and Gavin
Yep.
Stone. I felt like that was really good value for round 12. Definitely, some names I had some regret passing on when I took Emerson at 12-1. And then even later down, this is kind of why I didn't go the prospects early, is because I had a hunch we would see something like this. Xavier Isaac, round 14. Kyle Teal, round 14. Andrew Painter, you could make an argument he's the
Yep.
number one pitching prospect in baseball, round 14. Then you even go down a couple rounds. You've got Hayden Birdsong in round 16, Schwellenbach in 17, Misiorowski and Dylan Beavers in round 18. The prospects I had a strong feeling were kind of going to fall, but just in hindsight, there were some great values that kind of fell into the late rounds.
Yeah, no, you brought up great points. Roman Anthony 13-1.
Absolutely.
Taking a gamble on Jordan Walker 13-2.
Marcelo
Guys.
Mayer,
Yeah.
18-4.
Yep.
That's you can argue that his upside may not be as high, but that's a potential all-star shortstop in the 18th round.
Well,
That's
now I might get crucified for this, but I thought 14-12 for Chase Burns when Skeens went 5 overall. Now, I'm not saying Burns is Skeens, but we're talking about arguably the most electric arm coming out of the 2024 first year player draft. That's a massive difference in the number one arm coming out of the 2023 draft. And I think, when you take the actual numbers and put them on paper, I think they're closer together than some people would argue. I thought 14-12 for Burns was a massive steal. I thought he should have probably gone 9 or 10. And then Smith from Arkansas didn't even get drafted in our draft, if I'm correct. He had been in my draft queue all the way up until the end, and I don't think he was taken. So we had one pitcher from the 2024 class go, and he went in the 14th round.
Yeah.
DeGrom, go ahead.
No, it's just really that I didn't even realize he wasn't picked. It's surprising that, and you mentioned kind of some of the 2024 guys. I believe it was where was it? Hold on, trying to find it. It was Bazana, not round 9 was kind of around where I was expecting. Condon round 10 where I was expecting. I was able to grab Braden Montgomery off waivers. I was not kind of anticipating that at all. He was another guy that didn't get drafted at all. So just with some of those 2024 guys, definitely some guys that fell a lot farther than I would have expected or didn't get drafted at all.
Yeah. Bazana Condon 10-4. And then I kind of took a run. I took Weatherholt 15-4. I took Chase Burns 14-12. I would have been interested if I didn't take these guys to see where they fell. I took them at that point because, much like you, I was like, I'll wait on prospects. And these guys were just staring me in the face. And it's like, well, at 14-12, I'll take Burns. We're at about an hour and 15 here, so I'm gonna wrap it. But real quick, DeVries, you took at 17-15, Sprout at 24-1, and Kalaz at 28-1. I mean, I think you're talking about some massive talent here, right? You've talked about how much you love Kalaz. You think he has, superstar upside. So do I. DeVries, we touched on today. Sprout, we touched on. I mean, you're talking about elite level trade prospects at that point, or future starters for yourself. You had to be pretty happy with this.
Absolutely. And this is kind of what I was anticipating. I try and let the board fall to me. I kind of got a little nervous when I saw some of the first year player draft guys going earlier, but I kind of wanted to stick to my normal strategy, fill out the rosters first, get those starters. And I love kind of the prospects I ended up with. Only drafted kind of 6 of my 15, but I love the upside I have between Emerson, Kalaz, Miller, Sprout, DeVries, and Zebby Matthews.
Yeah, and you had a nice little minor league pairing there. Okay, I think final thoughts for me for the draft. First half, get your outfielder if you can. Scoop Ball if you can get him on the turn. I mean, that was an amazing pick for you to be able to get him on the turn. I think then waiting on starting pitching until round 7 through, let's say, 12 seemed to be doable in this draft. And then the last real piece is, wait on prospects. Do you feel like that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, so I wanted to solidify pitching earlier, especially in a league that big. Just relying on the waivers for arms was just not something I wanted to do by any means. So kind of getting that 1-2 early, which I did with Scoopel and Gilbert, that was really like the position I wanted to be in. I wanted to go first few rounds, grab, a formidable 1-2 atop the rotation for the long run, and then kind of middle rounds as I did with Fott, Pepiot, and then Singer and Fetty and Myers later, kind of round out the rotation later on.
Are you doing the hamster wheel league?
I don't think I am, no.
Okay. That's what we'll finish on today. So that league, that draft started, it's going to be kind of same context, but it's best ball, so no waiver. Acuna went 1. Ross took Soto 2. So kind of right into our conversation, he took Soto over Witt. Wow.
That surprises me. Yeah, I heard something about that league, but just slipped my mind.
It's a 30 man. I don't know that you're missing. 30 man.
I got to get in something like that soon. Just wasn't the right time.
We'll do one as a group for Scout the Statline, because 30 mans are, man, they're such a bitch.
Let's do it. I love 30 mans.
Yeah, man, it adds, and especially with all of us, it should be more enjoyable than the traditional. You had some people in some of these leagues that just forget that they even are living human beings. So Witt went 3, Ellie went 4, Ohtani went 5, Gunnar went 6. That seems fair, kind of within what we were talking about. I think Ellie's still a little bit early for you at 1-4, but it's the name. It's the name and the exciting speed. You know, he's going to be drafted probably higher than he's actually going to produce because he's Ellie. All right, Owen, that's all I got for us today. We're at an hour and 20 minutes. Awesome episode. Thanks for joining us again.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. We'll have you on real soon, and we'll touch on some of these other names that we didn't get to. But everybody have a fantastic night, and we'll see you next week.